Hey everyone, welcome back to our Develop in Swift tutorial series. It's been a while, but today we are going to be scrolling down here, back into data modeling, and we are going to be checking out Chapter 3, which apparently is new, Navigation, Editing, and Relationships. So in our last build, we learned how to save data locally using SwiftData, and today we're taking it a step further by learning how to navigate and display that data inside of our app using some sample content and clean SwiftUI architecture. Let me show you real quick what we're building today. So this is the completed project, and if you also want to ever reference any of the completed projects, they are available on my GitHub. But essentially we have a friends list here. We can click on any of these friends lists. Let's say we click on Rich, and we are taken to a detail view for Rich. And we're also using a tab view at the bottom to bounce between a list of friends as well as a list of movies, and there's also the different detail views available for both of these. So if this is something you're interested in learning, let's go ahead and dive on in. Link for this tutorial is also in the description below if you do want to follow along with those code snippets. Otherwise, we're going to be doing the navigate sample data. Alrighty, so it wants us to start by creating a new iOS project. We've definitely done this before. And for the parameters, it wants us to call it friends favorite movies and makes sure our storage is on none. So we're going to be starting from scratch, and we're not going to be using the SwiftData template. So app friends favorite movies, I already have this, so I'm going to call it number 1, and no storage. Looks like we're good to go, and let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so it wants us to start off in our content view here, and it's going to say that our app will show a separate list of friends and movies to create a unified interface. Wonderful. So we're going to be using tab view in order to tab between the friends and movies. So it wants us to first get rid of all the things within our VStack, and we're going to replace our VStack here. So if you want to double click on it, with a tab view. Now, until we add content to it, it's going to be totally empty. So just a little bit of context on the tab view. It is a built-in SwiftUI container that gives us a bottom navigation bar. This is super common in iOS apps for organization, any top-level screens like Home, Explore, Settings, etc. So in order to populate this, we're going to be adding a tab for friends. So whenever we want to add a tab, we're going to add the tab keyword, and then we're going to add a bracket and fill it with some content. So we're first going to use a string to display, what is this tab going to say? How is it labeled? So in this case, it's friends. And then we can also add a system image in order to kind of add a symbol to our tab item. So it wants us to use the person.and.person image here. Wonderful. And then we're going to add a brace here, and this is where we can actually, if we want to, we can fill out all of the content for the tab. Now, this is one way to kind of do the tab view. I also have a video on navigation showing a different way, but this way works too, especially if we're kind of having some lightweight content. So we can also populate it with some content here. So I'm going to say friends for now. It's a little bit small, and my simulator is also pretty bit small, but I'm going to make this headline. Actually, maybe we'll do large title. There we go. And we can see it a little bit better. Also at the bottom of the screen here, we can see that we have a tab with friends. Now it's currently highlighted blue because that is the tab that we are going to be navigating to. It wants us to add a separate tab here for movies. So after the brace, we'll go ahead and add another tab. Make sure you're still within that tab view, of course. We'll call this one movies, and we'll add a comma, and we'll also give it a system image of the film.stack. Once again, we'll add a brace after the brackets, and we can add some text within here. And just to know that we're on a different tab, let's go ahead and have it display movies, and we'll also make the font large title. So now when we kind of click between the two tabs on our phone screen, we're actually moving in between those two screens, which is really cool. Just as a tip, you can use these placeholder views to block out structure early in development. This will help you organize your workflow. If you go over 5 tabs, you'll have like this little plus with more tabs and things like that. 4 or under tabs is what I would aim for. Okay, now it wants us to create some data models. Perfect. So we're going to create a new Swift file, and we're going to call it friend. So let's create a new empty file. Call this one friend. We're going to start off by importing our foundation and importing our SwiftData. As you can see here, we're going to be using a @model. So we are using SwiftData within this project. Let's add that @model with a capital M, and then we'll create a class, and we'll call this one friend. And we're going to add it with our squiggly braces. Now, you will notice that we do get an error because when we are creating these classes, we do need to have the initializer. So within this model, this is where we can add different information about our friends. So for this example, we're just going to be adding a variable of name, and that would be a string value because that would be text. If you want to have things like birthdays or like, best friend status or something like that, this would also fall under the class. Today, we're keeping it pretty simple. We'll then add the initializer, and I'm just going to be using the autofill. I went a little fast there, so init, and then we're going to be selecting the one that's just going to autofill the name, and you'll see that it's autofilling with the self property. We're using the self property because if we have a friend and we want to refer to that friend, let's say Billy, I want Billy's name to be Billy, right? I don't want Billy's name to also apply to Elena, Rich, Rhodey, right? Each of those friends are going to have their own self to fill in the gaps there. So that's why we're using the lowercase self. We can even see here, you use self.name to distinguish the name property of the instance from the name parameter. Okay, and it wants us to make another empty file here. So new empty file, and we're going to call it movie. So make sure it's movie.swift. And we're going to go ahead and import our foundation, import our SwiftData, and we're going to create another model. And this time it's going to be a class of movie, and always make sure when you're creating these classes that they do start with the capital letter. And for this one, we're going to be adding a couple more properties. So this is going to be the title and release date. So variable title, which would be a string value. And then you'll notice when we have our release date, we're actually conforming this to be a date. And if you ever want to learn more about any of the code that we're adding, always feel free to do an option click. And this is going to bring up the quick Swift help. But essentially a date is a value that encapsulates a single point in time, which is independent of any particular calendar code. I think that's how you say it, system or time zone. So this is like an absolute reference to a date, and we can actually use this as a value just like we have integer strings, etc. Okay, and we'll also need to initialize it. I'm a huge fan of using the autofill initializer here. There are some cases where you do need to update the data within here, but 9 times out of 10, this is the heat. And in section 4 here, we're going to be displaying a list of friends. So because we're using SwiftData, we're going to be querying in order to get the model data. And we're going to connect the query to a data source, and we'll be giving a model container. Perfectly. So we are going to be creating a new SwiftUI view this time, not an empty file. So we'll want to select the new file from template here, and you can always use the plus button in the bottom left as well. I like right-clicking on my project navigator. And we're going to be selecting the SwiftUI view. And let's go ahead and name it, what do they have it here? Friend list.swift. Perfect. I do wish in future Xcodes, if you were to right-click on here, if you select your template as SwiftUI, they would just allow you to create a new SwiftUI file. Oh well, it's not that hard. Okay, and we know we have a new SwiftUI file because we have our preview on the right side of the screen. And what we're going to be doing is importing our SwiftData once more, because we are going to be referencing all of those saved bits and pieces of information. Okay, and it wants us to use the model container modifier to supply the preview. So when we are kind of just, checking how our app works in the preview on the right side of the screen here, we do need to kind of inject it with some of this information. So after the kind of friends list brackets here, I'm going to add the dot, and I'm going to do model container. And I'm going to use my autofill here, and we're going to be passing along the friend dot self, and then we're going to use the comma in memory, and we're going to set this value to be true. So this essentially allows us to just inject any test data for our previews. All right, and under our structure here, we're going to create an @query, and we're going to sort it by the friend's name. So just like when we're kind of looking at the information, we're going to use the / friend dot name. We're going to use the capital F there because that's how our class is set up. And then outside the brackets, we're going to create a private variable. We're going to call it friends. And this is going to refer to our entire list from our friend class here. And we're also going to be creating an environment. And we're going to be referencing our model context. So we're going to do / dot model context. If you've worked with SwiftData before, this should be pretty familiar to you. And then we'll create a private variable, and we're going to call this one context. This way we can refer to it in our code. What is the context of which we are referring and adding things to, or even removing things, right? Then in step 4, we're replacing our sample body here, which is essentially just hello world currently. And we're going to be adding a list. So you can type this manually if you would like to add it through the view library, totally up to you. And we're going to be looping through the contents of that list using the for each statement. And we're going to be looking through all of those different friends. We'll then add our brace. And this is where we're kind of, populating what's going to be shown to the user. And that's going to be looping through the friend. And we want the lowercase friend here. We'll then say in, and then we'll display those to the users. So we'll say friend.name. So we currently don't have any friends yet, because when we established the friend, we just said, they're just going to have a name, right? But we haven't actually populated this with anything. So in step 5, we're going to add the task modifier to add new friend instances. So we'll want to make sure that we're adding this task outside of the list. I always love to double click on the brace, otherwise it is 2 braces down, and we'll do task. We're going to use the autofill feature here, and this is where we're going to reference our context, which is what we created up here with the environment. Then we'll do dot insert, so we're going to be adding things to SwiftData. We're going to do friend, and then this is where we're going to add a bracket. We're going to use the autofill feature here just to make sure we have the spelling right, but we're going to be injecting the name, right? This is all that we currently have within our friend. If we had other variables or parameters here, we could then fill in that information, and our autofill would help us out a ton with that. Otherwise, for a name, it wants us to do Elena. And then we actually don't need to separate these values by comma. And we're going to insert another one. I'm going to do the model. So we're referencing friend with the name, and we're going to do Rody as well. So we can see that we have our list here. It has the normal built-in features of a default list. We can drag and kind of move it around, which is pretty cool. All right, but this kind of only exists within the Swift file. Let's go to our content view, and we're going to add this to be displayed to the users. So we also need to go to our preview down here, and we're going to do something similar. Actually, I think the exact same thing we did before, where we're going to be referencing the model container and passing along the friend. So even if you wanted to copy and paste the previous one, it should be good to go. Otherwise, we'll say for friend.self, so they're all individual in memory, and we're going to set this to be true. Then we'll go to where we have our friends tab here, and we're going to replace our friends text. Let's go ahead and get rid of that with a reference to our friend list file here. We don't need anything within those parameters. And now you can see, and I'll make this a little bit bigger for us here. Now you can see that we have Elena and Rody hanging out when we're on our friends tab. Now, something we're going to fix in just a little bit is if we go to our movies tab, and we go back to our friends tab, we have a couple copies here. So every time we're going to and from the view, it's kind of, not working the best. We can see here in section 5, using that task modifier is going to be adding the sample friends as a quick way to see data while we work with our app. But it's obviously not sustainable because every time we run our app on the simulator or bounce back and forth, we're going to be seeing those copies. So in order to address this issue, we're going to create custom classes to manage the sample data rather than using the .task. So this is going to provide data for all of our previews, so we can write our code that works equally well for previews with the temporary data and running an app with persisted data. So this is like testing our SwiftData 2.0 compared to last time. Alrighty, let's go ahead and create a new empty file, and we're going to call this one sample data. This is such a helpful tool for testing when we are making applications. And we're going to import our foundation and our SwiftData again. And we'll make a class and we'll call it sample data. So this time we are going to be creating a constant. So we're going to be using the let modifier in order to hold the memory container. So we'll say let model container. These are our camel case there. And this is going to conform to a model container. Perfecto. We'll also need to initialize it. You'll see class sample data has no initializers, so these are init, and we're actually going to make an empty initializer. So nothing within those parameters. So we're essentially creating a model container inside the initializer rather than passing it in, because this is going to require extra code to set up. The purpose of sample data is to hide the complexity of setting up and managing a set of sample data. So within the braces of the initializer here, we're going to be creating a schema which will allow us to pass an array containing our model types. This basically just helps connect the classes we define into our code and connect that to like the data within the data store, which sounds cool. It's like a data store. I'm going to go and buy some data. Anyways, we're going to say let schema, which is a weird word to spell, schema, which will equal a capital S schema. And we're going to add our bracket here, and then we're going to add, not that kind of bracket, we're going to be adding our square bracket. I'm then going to hit return, and this is where we're going to refer to those two classes. So we're going to do friend.self and the movie.self. In step 5, we're going to create a model configuration. So still within the initializer, but after the kind of double brackets we have there, let's say let model configuration equals model configuration. Then within the brackets, we're going to do the schema is stored memory. Oh my god, I don't know what that autofill is trying to do. But, I'm just going to type this one out. It might be easier. So our schema is going to conform to our schema, which we've just created above. We're going to add a comma, and then we're going to reference the is stored in memory only, and this is a Boolean value, and we're going to set this to be true. So real quick, by setting is stored memory true, we avoid writing to the disk. This is perfect for testing any previews, making like a sample educational content like this. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure that bracket's closed off. Oh, and make sure that these have commas separating them. They are in a list of those square brackets after all. All right, and you will see in step 6 that it is telling us that Xcode's going to warn us that the initializer may throw an error, and we may assume that it'll succeed because we have the friend.self, we have the movie.self, we should be good to go. But there's some weird circumstances where things can fail. So it gives us an example, trying to connect to a server when the internet is not available. Anything that might throw an error is forcing you to account for that possibility. I'll often refer to this as handling errors gracefully. So we're going to write some code to handle those errors gracefully in the next couple steps. Alrighty, so if you've watched some of my other videos before, you'll know I love doing this method, where we're going to essentially be doing the do, try, and catch method, and really to kind of handle those weird cases. And we're going to start off still within this initializer here. So after our model configuration, and let's create our model container. And we're going to have this equal try model container for schema, and then we're going to reference the configurations, and within the configurations we're going to create a square bracket of our model configuration, which is referencing the let that we just created above. Now we still have an error because we're going to try to attempt to make the call and see if it works. So if it does encounter an error with the try keyword here, it's going to throw that error to your code and handle it in whatever way is most appropriate for our app. In order to handle errors in step 8 here, we're going to be adding the do catch block. So before this model container here, we're going to go ahead and say do. We're going to add our brace, and then we're going to add a closing brace afterwards where we're going to reference catch. So essentially, if something goes really, really wrong when creating or saving the model, we crash hard, and the catch is going to basically catch it. So this is useful for debugging, but avoid it in production. And then in order to guarantee initializer won't exit without setting the value of model container, we can use the fatal error to catch the clause to terminate our app. Okay, so after our catch, or within those catch braces, we'll reference the fatal error. And we can also include like a little message within here. So we can add a string and we can say could not create model container. And then we can actually interpolate with our string interpolation what that error is by just referencing the error keyword, which is really cool. And there is a really helpful note here with the fatal error. So developers often use fatal error to find and fix coding mistakes that should never appear in the finished app, which is true. So this could be something weird like trying to turn a string into an integer, and the error is going to really give us some good insight within the console and the kind of error statements. And now in step 10, it wants us to create a shared instance of the sample data class to declare the initializer as private. So in our sample data, we're going to create a static let of shared, which is going to equal sample data with the empty brackets there. Just as a note, the kind of static keyword that we're using actually defines the shared property as belonging to the class itself, not each individual reference. In order to access this property, we'll have to use the .shared. So we'll put sample data .shared. All right, and step 11, we are going to make our upcoming code a little bit more concise by creating a computed property to access the main context of the model container. So after this let model container and before our initializer, we're going to create a variable of context, which is our model context, add a brace, and we'll have our model container dot main context. Now it does say we're going to get an error, which is related to Swift concurrency, a way to execute several tasks at the same time. Swift uses these actors to manage code that runs concurrently. So in order to fix that, above our class of sample data, we're going to create an at statement here, and we're going to have this be handled by the main actor. So when we add that, we're basically saying, hey, all of the code within this class has to be ran within that main actor block, and that's going to satisfy our error, make sure that it's absolutely good to go. Okay, in section 6, we're now going to be providing it with some sample data. So now that we've created the system for managing it and supplying it to the previews, we need to actually create the sample data itself. This is also really, really great for when we're working with things like APIs and we don't quite have that connection set up yet. So we'll kind of create an array of sample data, and we can use it throughout the app, especially within our previews. So instead of starting with real data or needing a backend, this lets us prototype our UI really quickly. So we're going to be going back to our friend Swift file here, where we had our class, and we're going to be creating some sample data. And we have a note here, if you're using your own names, be sure to include at least 5 friends. Okay, got it. So after the initializer, we're going to create a static let, just like we did before, of our sample data, and we're going to have this equal an array here, and this is where we're going to include all of our friends. And if you want to make this faster on yourself, I suggest using the friend autofill. We can do the Elena. If you want to make it really fast and you have the tutorial open, go ahead and just copy and paste these things in. But if you are doing your own names, make sure you add at least 5 in here. I'm just going to fix my tabbing. Oh, a really cool tip I actually learned the other day is, let's say we have some really weird indentation like this. If we highlight the place that needs like some indenting fixes, and we go to the editor, we go to the structure, we can actually like re-indent everything so it kind of gets fixed. I really like that. So now it's a lot more uniform. Okay, so when you have all of your friends in here, at least 5, we're then going to return to our sample data Swift file. And we're going to add a private function here in order to load the sample data. Now, I know the website doesn't really show where to add this that well, but essentially we're going to be adding the sample data at the very end because it is a private function. So we're going to go all the way before the very last brace. So we're still within our class here. We're going to create a private function, insert sample data. Add a brace here because we're going to be adding some code there. So we're going to be using a for in loop to iterate through the sample friends. And this is very similar to that for each that we've been using for our list, right? It's going to look at all the data and go, okay, I want to add this until the very end. So say for friend in friend, oops, I could spell it right, friend dot sample data, and we're going to add our brace one more time. And we can see here that the loop executes the code in its body for each of the items in the collection. The word friend after for defines a local variable that's only available in the body of the loop. So that's really good to know. And in the body of the loop, we're going to insert those friends by referencing the context.insert. And then from here, we're going to be adding that friend. Wonderful. We're then going to be calling the insert sample data function from the initializer. So within our do here, before our catch, we're going to reference that insert sample data. So this is going to insert the sample friends, eventually movies, into the context so our views have something to show. And we'll also want to save this data. We are using SwiftData after all. So after the insert sample data, let's go ahead and try the context.save, which is something that is built into SwiftData. We're then going to go back to our friends list here, and it looks like it wants us to actually get rid of the tasks here. When we're using the tasks, it actually caused a lot of errors, but make sure you get rid of it with the brace as well, because we're going to be using that sample data instead of the tasks, which kind of worked, but we kind of ran into that issue with the duplication. We're using the sample data to streamline this process and make it much more easier to test with. And now within our preview here, within the brackets of our model container, we can get rid of all of this for here. And we're going to reference our sample data. And remember when we were talking about making it static, we had to use the dot shared. And then we'll reference the model container after that. So sample data dot shared model container, and it wants us to verify that we can see our list of friends. I'll make my preview a little bit bigger. Perfect. We can see Elena, Graham, Mayuri, Rich, and Rody. Wonderful. And real quick, let's hop on over to our content view and let's go between the tabs to ensure that it's not duplicating. Now, we can't see anything because we also need to update the preview. I guess that's step 9. I went a little ahead of myself. We also need to update the preview here, and it is the exact same thing. So if you do want to copy and paste one more time, feel free to do so. Otherwise, sample data shared model container. All right, moment of truth. Yay! We only see the sample data. Hooray! So we have our list of friends. Fantastic job. But now we also want to display that list of movies. And we're going to be writing something similar to the friends list that we've created earlier, but we're going to be using the movie model type, and we're also going to be exploring dates a little bit more in depth. In apps that have more than one model type, we're going to sometimes create multiple views that follow the same pattern, and it even says feel free to refer to friends list as you code. Absolutely. Have it open. Sometimes what I'll do is, we have these kind of tabs at the top here. Sometimes for me, it's a little bit easier to kind of click on these rather than the sidebar there. Otherwise, copying and pasting can also be your total best friend. Okay, we're going to go to our movie Swift file here, and we're going to declare an array to hold some sample movies. Wonderful. So after we have our release date, okay, so after the initializer, but still within the class, we're going to create a static let, and we're going to refer to our sample data. Sample data, which is going to equal an array, so we're going to use those square brackets, and we're going to have our movie here. And always feel free to use the autofill feature here. So with our movies, we have a string, and we also have a release date. So I'm just going to copy what we have here. I'm using space traveler 3. Oh, traveler 3. And then for our release date, we can see here that we have a date. And then we're using the time interval since reference date. So even if you want to use the autofill feature here, I suggest doing it. And then we have this huge number. So the way this kind of works, as we can even see in the example, is this is a fixed point in time, which is January 1st, 2001. And we're essentially taking the seconds from that date in order to find out where we are. Now for me, seeing this 402 million number doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but essentially this is one of the ways that the computer can understand where we are. And the negative time interval means we want a date before the reference date. So if we do minus 402 million, we're separating these with underscores. This is a proper date as far as Swift is confirmed, and it does want us to add sample movies to the array, and we're going to separate all these values with a comma. Now, if you're like me and you're like, I don't know when the heck, how many seconds from this date something released, that doesn't make sense to me. If you want to go beyond, you can create dates from the calendar components instead. So go ahead and try this one out. So let's create a movie, and the title and reference, we'll do difficult cat. And for the reference date, for the date value, instead we're going to have that be a calendar dot current dot date, and then we're going to be using the from date components, and then in the bracket we're going to pass along a year. And we can even see that there's a year, month, day, hour, second, nanosecond, right? We don't have to go that in depth. Let's make it 2024. Let's add a month. Now this is a number value, so 1 through 12. Let's go ahead and make it 10. And then we also have a day value, and we can choose any day that might occur there. I'm just going to do the number 1. Now you will notice that we do have an error. It is because we do need to use our double question mark in order to make sure we have that kind of fallback. So outside of the second bracket, we're going to add double question mark, and we're going to provide that with the fallback of date. So to me, I know we're working with sample data, etc., but even adding that sample data, let's say we choose to display this date. Let's say we want to, have the movie and release date, right? If I'm filling in this sample data and I'm doing it by the seconds, that doesn't really click for me. So this is another way that's a little bit more human to read. Otherwise, let's go ahead and copy and paste the rest of this sample data. If you want to pause and type it out, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'll be adding the rest of those movies. Now that we've done that, we're going to go to the sample data file here, and we're going to insert these sample movies because we're going to be displaying them within the kind of movie list, etc. there, so we can test and see how it looks. So within our function here, after the brace, we'll go ahead and say for movie in movie dot sample data brace context insert, and then we want the movie. All right, and we're going to create a new SwiftUI file. So new file from template SwiftUI view. We're going to call it movie list. And within the preview here, we're going to do our model container. We're going to reference our sample data.shared. I could spell model container. Perfect. And I assume within here, we're probably going to set it up the same way. So let's make sure that we have an import of our Swift data. And looks like step 6, we're going to have a list here again. Say for each movies, add our brace, movie in, we'll add our text to display that to the user, movie dot title. Oh, and in step 5, it actually wants us to populate them with the query just like we did before. And you know what, just to save a little bit of time here, let's copy and paste this thing. So from our friends list, let's go ahead and paste this. Now we will need to change it from friend name instead to be movie dot title, And then for instead of the friends, we'll make it the movie and movies. Okay, now it's loading up. There we go, and we can see and verify that we have all of our different movies here. Wonderful. And we are only grabbing the movie title currently. Keep in mind there is a part 2 of this tutorial, so maybe we'll get to see the dates. I don't know. Wonderful. And then it wants us to go back to our content view, and we're going to replace our text with movies, just like we did before, with our movie list with the empty brackets. So now let's go ahead and test that out. Look at that. We're in our content view and we can go between our friends and all of the different movies. So section 8, we want to now navigate to a detail view. So we want to show a detail view when people tap on the rows in the list. So let's say I click on The Difficult Cat. I want to learn more about that movie. What are the ratings? What is it about, right? A detail view is something that we can kind of have as navigation, and it says on the iPhone in portrait navigation, it's actually being used as a push animation with the child view sliding on top of the parent. It's a visual helpful cue that you're going deeper into the hierarchy. Wonderful. So we're going to shrink this down again. We're going to reference our friends list, and we're going to enclose the list within a navigation split view. And my tip for this one is if you want to enclose anything, like in case this list, right click where it says list, and you notice we don't have, embedded navigation, blah, blah, blah. Instead, I would just press the embed, and we get this placeholder container, and this is where we're going to reference our navigation split view. Now we do have a couple errors here, and it says we are missing the argument parameter for the detail and call. So we are going to double click on here. So we're going down 1, 2, 3 braces, and we're going to be adding our detail. And we're going to use the autofill, and this is where our code is. You will get an error because there's like the placeholder there. You can just delete it, which will get rid of the error. And we're also going to be adding the navigation title of friends so people know where they are. It's just like a next little title for navigation. So next we're going to be adding a navigation link to each friend within the list. So if I click on, Elena, it's going to go to Elena's individual navigation view. So we're going to keep our for each here, and before our text, we're going to create a navigation link. And this is going to be based on the friend dot name. And then within the text, we're going to add a little bit more detail here. So we're going to wrap this all in a string, and we're going to say detail view for, and then we're going to string interpolate that friend name. So it wants us to experiment by clicking on one of the friends in the list and seeing how the navigation works. Oh, but before we do that, I forgot the brace. So we're going to wrap up this text within a brace here. There we go. There we go. So now we should be able to click on Elena, detail view for Elena, detail view for Rich, right? So essentially it's passing through this information. So what's within here? Well, we just have detail view for the friend's name. And it's cool because we even have this little navigation title that's kind of animating. Like, watch this title real quick. As I click on Rich, notice how it kind of becomes the back button, and it kind of gets animated to and from, which is also telling us, hey, this is how you return to that list of friends, return to that parent view. That's another reason why we're using those navigation titles. Pretty cool. And we can even give each of these friends a title. So let's go after our text here. We'll add a dot navigation title, which will just be friend. And we can even augment the navigation display mode. So should be the first option here, dot navigation bar title display mode, and we can set this to be dot inline. And let's see how that's changed. So let's click on Graham. We have friend up here, and so inline is going to put it directly at the top in the middle. That's pretty cool. And now within our detail here, so let's scroll down after our title, we're now going to add a default detail view and give it a navigation as title as well. And this is going to provide a view that people see when nothing is selected within the sidebar. And apparently this only appears on devices with screens wide enough to display the two views side by side. So we can add some text here, and we'll say select a friend, navigation title, friend, and we'll add the inline again. So dot navigation bar, dot inline. All right, we're going to be going back to our movie list over here. We're going to be setting up the exact same hierarchy that we've done before. So let's right click on our list, embed, and it's going to be a navigation split view. We're going to add our detail, get rid of our placeholder. We're also going to add our dot navigation title. I think we'll call this one movies. We'll make sure that we add the navigation links. So I'll say navigation link movie dot title. Add a brace before we forget, wrap that up with our text, and we'll go ahead and say, detail view for string. Do our string interpolation. Probably could have just retyped it, it would have been faster. Or, copy and pasting works too. Let's add our details. So text, select movie. We could add the player navigation title, and we could set it to be inline as well. Make sure you're using the autofill complete feature because you can just absolutely soar. So congratulations, we've created the app. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, let's go ahead and let's pop it into full screen here. Go back to our content view, make sure that everything works. All right, we can click on any of our friends. We get the detail view for them. Click on the movies. Perfect, look at that. Amazing. So congratulations, you've created an app pre-populated with some sample data. People can now navigate between the lists and inspect individual friends and movies. Right now it just says detail view XYZ, but maybe in the future. And the next tutorial will be looking at how to populate that with a little bit more detail. So we have some check your understandings. So which code below displays the list row in a root view and presents detail view as its detail? Okay, so we want list row in the root and we want detail view as the detail. I'm going to go ahead and say that it's the first option here. That's correct. This is because the argument in the navigation link initializer contains the text for the row and the view closure its destination. So even if we go back to, let's say, our friends list here, where we have our detail, we have the link, which is represented by the friend name, and then the text is displaying the detail view for said friend's name or anything else we might be adding in the future. Next question. So which option below correctly uses code that may throw an error? So we have try catch, we have do try catch, and we have do catch. I'm going to go ahead and say it's the middle one. That's correct, because we're using the do catch to call throwing the code and handle any errors that were thrown. The try keyword marks the call to the throwing code. We use this, I believe, in our sample data. Yep. So we have our do with our model container, and then we had our tries. And then for any reasons, kind of catching what would ever happen, we would have the fatal error. And then with the crash, we would see what the reason was, and we can go in and fix it. Okay, next question. How do you ensure that model data only stays in memory so that it's easy to use in previews? All right, to create a temporary model container. When creating the model container, pass true in memory parameter, and when creating model context, pass true in memory parameter. So it's definitely one of these two, and pay really close attention to the model container versus the model context. So when we were using the previews here, we were using the model containers. So by keeping the data only in memory, you ensure that it's never ever persisted to the disk, which is great for using it in our previews. Awesome, we got all the answers. for the tutorial, and now there is an article at the very end as well. And it wants us to reflect upon the concepts, and normally there is a continue practicing where we can expand our application. However, we are going to be expanding it within the next chapter. So it suggests take a break, grab a drink and a snack, and within the create, update, and delete data, we'll be doing just that. But if you really, really want to challenge yourself, you can revisit birthdays. Otherwise, I will be creating a tutorial. If you're watching this like the day it comes out, probably within the next week, on the create, update, and delete data, and we'll be continuing this application. There is a project files here, or you can grab the completed code that we created today off my GitHub pages if you'd like. Otherwise, dream big, code bigger, and have an amazing day. And I'm curious to see what applications you'll create.